Crime and Crime Again is a true crime podcast containing subject matter that may be graphic or disturbing. Listener discretion is advised. This episode discusses topics that may be triggering, such as sexual assault. Please take care while listening. Experts have said that while not all peeping toms become violent offenders, most, if not all, serial rapists and murderers engage in voyeuristic behavior before escalating. Voyeurism is often a gateway crime to far more serious offenses. Peeping toms, as they have been dubbed, are considered sexual predators. Voyeurism committed against a non-consenting and unsuspecting person is predatory in nature. These sexual predators are engaging in this behavior because they grapple with sexual urges, and often a social ineptitude or disorder that prevents them from seeking consenting partners in a safe and appropriate manner. But peeping toms are not just strange men lurking in the shadows outside of your window. In the age of technology, these crimes are being committed in digital form. From cases of cameras being found in women's dressing rooms, to the severe problem of men taking upskirt photos of unsuspecting women in public, these crimes are more common than you may think. But in today's case, we're traveling back to 2002, when the peeping tom in question was indeed an obscured figure lurking from window to window. He robbed a vibrant young woman of the chance at life, and eluded detectives at the most critical point in the investigation. This is the case of Stephanie Bennett. Stephanie Renee Bennett was born on April 30th, 1979 in Rocky Mount, Virginia. She grew up in the area and went on to attend Roanoke College in Salem, Virginia. Soon after graduating from college with a business degree, Stephanie moved down to Raleigh, North Carolina, where she and her stepsister moved into an apartment with another roommate on Lakeland Drive. Stephanie quickly landed a job with IBM sometime in 2001, where she worked as an administrator. Everyone who knew and loved Stephanie has described her as an absolute shining light. She was gentle and kind-hearted, bubbly and always smiling, with a sweet southern accent to boot. In May 2002, Stephanie was 23 years old, had been working at IBM for almost a year, and was planning a big move to Greenville, South Carolina, to be with her boyfriend of 4 years. Unbeknownst to Stephanie, her boyfriend even had plans of proposing in the near future. On the night of May 20th, 2002, Stephanie went home to her apartment, where she had the place to herself, as her roommates were out of town at the time. She talked to her boyfriend around 8 p.m., promising him that first thing in the morning, she would fax over an apartment application, as they had been apartment hunting in Greenville. When the morning of May 21st, 2002 rolled around, and her boyfriend still had not received a fax from Stephanie, he tried calling her with no luck. He reached out to Stephanie's stepsister, who also tried to call her a few times that day, but again, she got no response. Initially, no one thought much of it. They assumed that Stephanie was just busy at work and would call back when she got the chance. But later that day, Stephanie's employer called her stepsister, informing her that Stephanie had not shown up for work and also hadn't called in. Immediate concern started to set in. Her stepsister called a friend who lived near the apartment and asked if they could stop by and find out whether or not Stephanie's car was in the parking lot. Sure enough, her car was there, and the sense of panic intensified. Stephanie's stepsister then called the apartment complex, asking management to send someone into the apartment to check on Stephanie. But more than 20 minutes passed by with no call back from the complex. Meanwhile, Raleigh police received a call from an employee at the Bridgeport Apartments on Lakeland Drive, stating that they had a quote-unquote dead person and needed police immediately. When police arrived, they found a woman on the floor of one of the bedrooms. She was identified as 23-year-old Stephanie Renee Bennett. Stephanie was found nude, lying on her back on the bedroom floor. She had a deep indentation around her neck and ligature marks on both her wrists and ankles. Whatever had been used to strangle Stephanie was nowhere to be found, and strangely, the restraints that had caused the ligature marks around her wrists and ankles had been removed from her body and were also missing from the scene. An autopsy confirmed that Stephanie was sexually assaulted, and a sample of seminal fluid was recovered from her body. It was determined that Stephanie was likely murdered around midnight the night before. The crime scene itself was organized. There were no signs of a struggle or forced entry. Investigators concluded that the suspect likely entered the first-floor apartment through a window. One window was found open about 1 inch, and there were pine needles on the floor underneath the window, indicating that the suspect had tracked in foliage from outside when they entered. Not a single foreign fingerprint was found in the apartment. This meant that the suspect was, again, organized and had thought out this crime, having likely worn gloves. In one of the bedroom closets, investigators found a home phone, still on its hook, a box of tissues, and a glass of water. Disturbingly, this discovery made it appear as though the suspect sat silently in that closet, waiting for Stephanie. When the roommates were allowed into the apartment to retrieve some of their belongings, one of them noticed that a green and white laundry basket was missing from the apartment. They also noticed that the suspect seemed to have taken a small stereo, but other than that, there were no signs of anything else that was missing or stolen. Robbery was pretty quickly ruled out as the primary motive. The only forensic evidence collected from the crime scene was the DNA recovered from Stephanie's body. During the early days of the investigation, it was discovered that in April 2002, just a few weeks before Stephanie's murder, she sent an email to her aunt, expressing concern and fear that a neighbor spotted a strange man peeping into her window. Multiple neighbors in Stephanie's complex corroborated the sightings of a peeping Tom lurking around in the weeks leading up to the murder. After interviewing several of Stephanie's neighbors, investigators were able to put together a composite sketch of the alleged peeping Tom. He was described as a white man with short hair, wearing glasses and a hooded sweatshirt. The sketch was given to the media, but garnered no leads. Raleigh police put a patrol on the apartment complex, hoping to catch the peeping Tom in the act. And within weeks of Stephanie's murder, they did. Police spotted the man peeping into some of the apartments and took him into custody. The peeping Tom turned out to be a 34-year-old man with a criminal record for peeping into women's windows and pleasuring himself. Police took a sample of his DNA to compare with DNA from the crime scene, but his DNA was not a match. The media continued to publish the composite sketch in the hope that eventually someone would recognize the suspect and come forward. Meanwhile, investigators continued interviewing and taking DNA samples from Stephanie's neighbors and other men in the immediate area. In total, they tested more than 200 DNA samples against the crime scene DNA. None of them were a match. At that point, Stephanie's case started going cold. In the summer of 2004, 2 years after Stephanie's murder, Raleigh police freshly reviewed the case and concluded that perhaps their initial suspicion about a peeping Tom may have been correct after all. There was likely another peeping Tom lurking around at the time of Stephanie's murder. Police started interviewing neighbors in the apartment complex again, and this time they received brand new information. They learned that in the days and weeks leading up to the murder, neighbors had spotted a man in a hooded sweatshirt creeping around the complex, just like their first suspect. But this time, neighbors noted that this man was also smoking a cigarette and walking a large dog that looked like a Rottweiler. The man was described as tall and lanky, almost frail, and he had long, scraggly hair. One neighbor remembered seeing the man walking through a partially wooded area toward another apartment complex nearby. Investigators followed through with this lead, and they visited the neighboring complex, known as Dominion Apartments. They gave the description of the man to employees, asking if they knew a tenant who matched that description. Employees at the apartment were quickly able to give police a name: Drew Planton. Drew Planton was 35 years old and had moved to Raleigh after graduating from Michigan State University with a degree in biology. He worked as a chemist at the North Carolina Department of Agriculture. Planton lived a rather solitary life. He didn't have many friends. He preferred to be left alone and possessed few social graces. But he also had no criminal record. He may have struck people as socially awkward or impolite, but not as a violent criminal. It turned out that Planton had moved away from Dominion Apartments a few weeks after Stephanie's murder. Investigators located his new apartment and visited several times attempting to speak with him, but he would never answer the door. When they failed to make contact with him at his new apartment, police decided to visit his place of employment. There, they finally met their new primary suspect. While speaking with police for the first time, Planton became visibly nervous and uncomfortable. Lead detective Ken Copeland recalled that Planton started to shake uncontrollably. Planton refused to go to the police station and answer questions, but police were able to convince him to speak with them at his apartment a few days later. At Planton's apartment, police asked him if he was aware of the murder of Stephanie Bennett 3 years earlier, to which he said he was unfamiliar with the case. They also asked him if he had ever been to the apartment complex Stephanie lived in, to which he also said no. And police asked if he wore glasses or had ever worn glasses, and once again, Planton told them that he did not. But police already knew that Planton was wearing glasses in his driver's license photo. It was clear that, at least to some degree, Drew Planton was not being truthful, for unknown reasons. Police then asked Planton for a DNA sample, but he responded by telling them that his mother was an attorney and he would like to speak with her before giving them a response. A few days later, Planton emailed Detective Ken Copeland, declining to submit his DNA for testing. With that email, however, Detective Copeland was able to obtain Planton's IP address, and cyber investigators did some digging. They discovered that before Planton was ever interviewed by police, he had visited the website that was created in honor of Stephanie, despite having told police that he was not familiar with the case. At that point, investigators put Planton under surveillance, hoping to catch him off guard and obtain a sample of his DNA. For a week, investigators watched Planton's apartment, waiting for him to discard anything they could use to obtain DNA. But Planton was a scientist. He knew that even the odd water bottle or toothpick could put him in prison. When out in public, Planton would pocket his water bottles and napkins, and when he was at work, he would eat lunch in his car. Planton's supervisor actually agreed to help investigators in trying to obtain his DNA. So every day when Planton left work, his supervisor would visit his desk and his workstation, scouring everything from his keyboard to the floor for strands of hair. But it turned out that Planton had actually taken to cleaning up every stray piece of hair that fell from his head. Planton's supervisor then attempted a new tactic and informed Raleigh police of her plan. She invited all of her employees out for a work lunch at a local restaurant, and when they arrived, undercover police were there. But Planton continued his game of trying to be the smartest in the room. At the work lunch, he only ate foods that didn't require a utensil: a burger, some French fries. Then came time for dessert. Hesitantly, Planton got himself a bowl of banana pudding, and according to Detective Copeland, he took 2 tiny bites before attempting to wipe down his fork with a napkin. When Planton left, police quickly recovered the fork and sent it off for testing. But the results were not quite what they were hoping for. The DNA on the fork was only a partial match to the DNA from the crime scene, not enough to convict. But police knew, at the very least, that they were on the right track. Once again, Planton's supervisor employed a new tactic. She assigned him to do some lab testing after hours. Though disgruntled about it, he agreed to do the work, and upon leaving, he had not thought to pocket the latex gloves he used during his testing. Investigators arrived and recovered the gloves. A few days later, the results were in. The DNA was a match. Finally, after more than 3 years, police have caught the man who murdered Stephanie Bennett. On October 19, 2005, Drew Planton was arrested and charged with the first-degree murder of Stephanie Renee Bennett. On October 20, 2005, police executed a search warrant on Planton's apartment, where they seized more than 350 items, some of which included 2 shotguns, 9 handguns, ammunition, 2 machetes, a sword, and 40 knives. Police also seized disturbing pornographic material, in the form of photographs, movies, and magazines. Among the items recovered from Planton's apartment was the green and white laundry basket that one of Stephanie's roommates noticed was missing from their apartment after the murder. Police also found some old mail in Planton's apartment addressed to a woman named Rebecca Huseman in Lansing, Michigan. Knowing that Planton had graduated from Michigan State University, they decided to investigate further. Rebecca Huseman was 22 years old and worked as a dancer in a nightclub in Lansing, Michigan, when she was found shot to death in the driver's seat of her car outside of her boyfriend's home on October 19, 1999. Her murder went unsolved for years, until police in Raleigh, North Carolina, searched Drew Planton's apartment and recovered evidence linking him to Rebecca. One of the items found in Planton's apartment on October 20, 2005, 6 years after Rebecca's murder, was a .45 caliber pistol. Raleigh police sent the gun to Michigan for ballistics testing, and investigators in Michigan positively identified that pistol as the one used in the murder of Rebecca Huseman. Raleigh police found items in Planton's apartment that could be linked to 20 other women. Investigators tracked down those women to confirm that they were alive and well. They also found evidence that Planton may have found his next target, but he was arrested before he could harm any more women. There is speculation that Planton may have been responsible for other unsolved murders, but today, his total number of victims remains unknown. From the moment he was arrested, Drew Planton was silent. He refused to speak to anyone and went into a virtually catatonic state. During his first court appearance, Planton had to be wheeled into the courtroom in a wheelchair, and his eyes remained shut the entire time, refusing to look at the judge. He was promptly placed on suicide watch. 2 months later, Planton was taken off of suicide watch, for reasons that are unclear, and investigators were feeling confident about the upcoming trial. But the trial would never happen. On January 2, 2006, less than 3 months after his arrest, Drew Planton was found unresponsive in his cell and could not be resuscitated. He had hung himself with a bedsheet. Stephanie Bennett's killer had irrefutably been caught, but he never faced justice in a courtroom. This, to me, is one of those cases that are few and far between, where investigators truly put their hearts into catching the person who stole Stephanie's chance at life. Stephanie Bennett was a sweet soul who was achieving success in her career and aspired to be a mother someday. She was robbed of that opportunity, and robbed of true justice. Remember her name. All sources for this episode will be listed in the show notes. If you'd like to request a case for me to cover, you will also find a link to a case request form. I have officially launched the Patreon page, where for $5 a month, you can get access to all episodes ad-free, and coming soon, patrons will have access to a monthly bonus episode. Don't forget to check out the YouTube channel, where I've been uploading all of my episodes in video format. If you like the show, please consider leaving a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Reviews are truly the easiest and the best way to support your favorite shows. You can follow the podcast on Twitter @CrimeAgainPod, on Instagram @CrimeAgainPodcast, on Facebook, just search Crime and Crime Again Podcast, and on TikTok @CrimeAgainPodcast. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode of Crime and Crime Again.